I should have known something was off when Margaret opened a second bottle of wine. She never drank more than a glass. "A lady must always remain lucid," she once told me, as if I were a teenager about to ruin the family name by slurring my vowels. But that night, she poured another round with a wide smile and the kind of brightness in her eyes that always meant something was brewing. Not joy. Never joy. Just performance. Brian sat beside me, his hand resting near mine, but not on it. That had become our quiet norm. Close enough to be seen. Far enough to be forgotten. The dining room was immaculate, as always. Long mahogany table polished to a mirror, silverware placed with military precision. The chandelier's light cast soft shadows across our plates, making even the salmon look dramatic, his mother's way. "Lillian, you've outdone yourself with the table," said Caroline, Brian's younger sister, swirling her wine. "So elegant." I smiled. Of course I hadn't set the table, the house staff had. But Caroline never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't really one of them, just the live-in ghost who handled things. When dessert came, Margaret's signature lemon tart with lavender whipped cream. Caroline leaned across the table, her tone breezy. "So, are you joining the family trust update next week? I assume you got the email?" I blinked. "What meeting?" Her smile froze, just for a breath. "Oh. Huh. I thought everyone was included." That's when Margaret dabbed the corner of her lips with her napkin, folded it neatly, and said it. "Darling, you're not family, not legally, not where it matters." Her voice was velvet. Her eyes were knives. I looked at Brian. He didn't flinch, didn't meet my eyes, didn't say a word, just reached for his water. My skin turned to ice, but I didn't let it show. I nodded once, quietly, and excused myself from the table. The powder room down the hall was cold, always too cold. A design choice, apparently. The mirror above the marble sink stared back at me, cruel and bright. And I stared right back, trying to find her, the woman I used to be. My reflection looked soft around the edges, not from age, from erosion, a slow, silent wearing down of sharp corners. I leaned in. My lips barely moved as I whispered the question I hadn't asked in years. "Who are you?" No answer. I turned my hand over and stared at the ring on my finger. Gold. Simple. Chosen together on a beach trip to Carmel. He said he didn't believe in diamonds. Said our love didn't need a legal certificate to be real. Said forever was a choice we made daily, not a contract. I believed him. God, I believed him. The door was locked, but the house was full of whispers. I could feel them pressing through the walls, their judgment, their certainty, their quiet glee. The worst part? I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was just tired. Tired of being almost enough. Tired of earning affection like a paycheck. Tired of bending myself into shapes that fit someone else's idea of graceful. I ran cold water over my hands and tried to steady my breath. The lavender soap smelled like the tart we didn't finish. I looked back at the ring. It felt heavier now, like it was made of something denser than gold. Maybe grief. Outside the bathroom, the wine glasses clinked and laughter fluttered like ribbons through the hallway. A celebration. I was the only one who didn't know what they were celebrating. I reached for a hand towel and dried my hands slowly, deliberately. Something inside me had shifted, just a little. A single thread pulled loose from the fabric. I didn't know, yet that it would all unravel. But I knew this much. I would never sit at that table the same way again. People always ask how a person like me ends up forgotten in her own story. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single door that closes. It's more like 1,000 quiet silences you convince yourself not to notice. I met Brian during my final year at the academy. I was covered in charcoal dust and critiques, balancing 2 part-time jobs just to keep painting. He walked into my life like a well-tailored promise, all clean collars, careful smiles, and expensive watch ticks. He said he loved the way I looked when I was thinking. No one had ever said that to me before. Our worlds were different. Mine was paint under the fingernails and ramen at midnight. His was opera boxes and imported wine I couldn't pronounce. But he said I didn't need to change a thing, except I did. It started small, skipping a gallery show to join him at his firm's charity ball, then dropping my internship because we'll be traveling a lot this summer and I want you with me. My friends raised eyebrows, but I smiled and said, "It's just temporary. I'll go back." Only I didn't. We moved into the guest house on his parents' estate, just for a few months. That turned into a year, then 5. The studio I once dreamed of never materialized. The canvases stayed boxed in the attic. Instead, I learned how to arrange hydrangeas in the style his mother preferred. I memorized seating charts. I hosted dinner parties where I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. They called me sweet, a word that always felt like a glass cage. His mother, Margaret, would smile at me during luncheons and say, "Lillian has such a talent for keeping things tasteful." Never creative, never brilliant, just tasteful. As if I were a color swatch, not a person. Brian, for his part, never shouted, never struck me. But silence can be its own kind of violence. When I tried to talk about painting again, he said, "It's cute that you want to revisit your hobby. But it's not really practical, is it?" A hobby. I remember once, a moment I replay too often. I had pulled out an old canvas and left it near the sunroom to dry. It was abstract, heavy reds and stormy purples, a self-portrait in a way, of how I felt. Brian walked by, glanced at it and said, "Looks angry. Maybe keep it upstairs?" So I did. I kept it upstairs. Kept myself upstairs. Friends drifted. Or maybe I did. I stopped returning calls. I was always too busy managing the next event, organizing the foundation's newsletter, running errands for people who never said thank you. One afternoon, my college roommate, Jules, visited the estate. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years. She walked through the house like it was a museum. When she reached the kitchen, she whispered, "Lils, this doesn't feel like you." I shrugged, told her I was happy, said, "He takes care of me." But that night, I cried in the pantry. Not because she was wrong, because she was right. The wedding ring on my finger, gold, simple, elegant, began to feel less like a promise and more like a reminder of what I used to want, of what I gave away. Brian said we didn't need paperwork to prove our love. "Marriage is just for taxes," he joked once. And I laughed, because love doesn't need signatures. But somewhere between being his partner and being his shadow, I stopped asking questions. Even now, I wonder, did I choose to disappear? Or did I just forget how to be seen? The first time I caught myself apologizing to a vase for bumping into it, I knew something was wrong. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was a reflex. I had become the kind of woman who apologized for taking up space. And the tragedy? No one asked. Me too. They just stopped noticing when I did. I wasn't snooping. Not at first. Brian had left his office door half open, a quiet rebellion against his usual "do not disturb" rule. The desk lamp was still on, casting that familiar golden halo over the walnut surface. A neat stack of papers rested just slightly out of alignment, the only imperfection in an otherwise curated room. I stepped inside, barefoot, careful, like the room might bite. That's when I saw it. The thick document labeled Pendleton Family Trust, Reallocation draft. My last name wasn't Pendleton, but Brian's was. I opened it. Names. So many names. Brian's mother, his siblings, their spouses. Even Caroline's toddler, his name written in bold beside a sizable future inheritance clause. I flipped page after page, searching. My eyes moved faster, then slower, then stopped. I wasn't in it. Not once. Not even a footnote. I stood still for a long time. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 50. My heart was thudding, but not in panic. In the quiet throb of something ancient. Like a wound remembering it's still open. When I heard the sound of ice in a glass behind me, I turned. Brian stood at the doorway, whiskey in hand, his expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said. Calm, not ashamed. Held the document up. "I'm not in it." He shrugged, walked in, and took a sip. "Because you're not legally family." Something cracked inside me. "We're married." "We're committed," he corrected gently. "We've talked about this, Lillian. Paperwork doesn't define us. You said that too, remember? I was 23 and in love." "And now?" he asked. His tone was curious, like he was asking about the weather. "Now," I whispered. "I realize I was tricked." He sighed, not angry, bored. "It's not that deep, Lil. You're making it dramatic." My hands were shaking. "The house isn't in my name. The bank account's mine," he said, setting the glass down. "I've always handled finances. You wanted to focus on the home, the lifestyle. You made that choice." "No," I said, backing away. "I made sacrifices. That's different." He tilted his head. "You're acting like a victim. You've had a beautiful life here. Everything was provided for you." "Provided?" The word snapped like a wire. "I built this life with you. I gave up everything for you. And now I find out I was never even written down?" He stared at me a moment. Then, with unnerving calm, he said, "Maybe that was the plan. Maybe you were a phase." I didn't expect it to last this long. I stood frozen. "I wanted someone different back then," he continued. "You were passionate, wild. It was exciting. But people evolve. I need someone grounded, presentable." I laughed. The sound escaped like a broken thing. "So this whole time, I was a placeholder?" "Don't be so emotional." I walked past him, out the door, into the hallway where Margaret's portraits watched silently from the walls. My skin burned beneath their painted eyes. In the kitchen, I grabbed my coat and my keys. My phone, just the essentials. "Where are you going?" Brian called after me. I didn't answer. The driveway was cold. My hands fumbled with the car door. The ring on my finger scratched against the metal. I didn't cry until I was inside. Engine off, heat on. I called my sister, voicemail, again. "Hey, it's me," I said through tears. "I don't know where to go." I didn't expect her to call back. We hadn't spoken in years, because of Brian. Because I'd pushed her away. So I sat there, outside the estate gates, watching the lights, inside flicker behind the trees. That house had never been mine. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and let the silence consume me. And then, somewhere around 3 a.m., it came. Not clarity. Not yet, just something smaller. A flicker, a spark. Rage. Not loud, not fire, but a cold deep in my belly. I had been erased. Strategically, lovingly, over years, and I had let it happen. That part hurt the most, but I wasn't going to stay gone. Not forever. The day I left the estate for good, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt overdue. There was no confrontation, No final monologue delivered through gritted teeth. Just me, a duffel bag, and a cardboard box that smelled faintly of dust and oil paint. Inside were my old brushes, a few half-finished canvases, and a sketchbook. I hadn't opened in years. I retrieved them from the attic of the guest house, where I used to sneak away and breathe, the one place that still smelled like me. Cedar and turpentine. I left behind designer shoes, silk robes, and an empty closet full of someone else's expectations. I found a tiny studio apartment above a florist's shop on the quieter end of town. The rent was cheap, the windows stuck, and the radiator rattled. Like an old man clearing his throat. But it was mine. The first night I slept on a mattress on the floor with a wool blanket and no pillow. I cried into my coat, then laughed at myself for crying. Then cried again. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up in uneven waves, like bad weather. I got a part-time job at a corner cafe. I poured coffee, cleared tables, learned to smile at strangers without letting it hurt. My hands, once praised for their delicacy, grew calloused again, in the best way. It was there I met Ruth. She was in her 70s, lived alone across the hall from my apartment. The first time she invited me for tea, I hesitated, but something in her voice, soft but certain, reminded me of the grandmother I lost too young. Her apartment smelled like bergamot and old paper. I used to have someone too, she told me over lemon biscuits. A soldier. He didn't come home, so I made my life my own. She said it with no bitterness, just fact. Like pain becomes a stone you carry, but you can learn to carry it differently. We became a quiet rhythm in each other's lives. Tea on Tuesdays, walks on Sundays. No demands, no pretending. One afternoon, I pulled out the sketchbook. Ruth watched in silence as I painted her. Charcoal lines across her strong, weathered face. She touched the image and whispered, "You haven't lost it, you know, just misplaced it for a while." I started painting again. Every day, small pieces, faces mostly, women with closed eyes and open wounds. I began volunteering at a local art center. It was Ruth's idea. Go where people need what you already have, she said. The center was tucked behind a row of storage units, half forgotten by the city. But inside, color, energy, life. Children with too big smocks and veterans with stories stitched into their silence. That's where I met Isaac. He was quiet. Always wore his veteran's patch with an understated pride. He never pushed, just watched. Then, one day, as I helped a little girl paint a butterfly's wings, he said, "Pendleton, huh? That used to be my district." I froze. My family, I began, then stopped. He nodded. Yeah, I remember them. Tried to host a fundraiser for wounded vets last year. They declined. Said it would attract the wrong kind of attention. He didn't say it cruelly. Just fact. My stomach turned. "I'm sorry," I said. Isaac looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Don't be sorry. Be different." And I realized I already was. The life I was building now wasn't curated or golden or presentable. It was crooked and humble and real. There were no grand entrances, no family emblems on the wall, just my hands. My art. My breath, finally steady. One evening, I painted until midnight. A woman in a red coat, standing at the edge of a cliff, arms wide to the wind. I titled it, Returned. When I stood back, paint on my shirt, tea gone cold, I smiled, for the first time in years, I had nothing. And yet I had everything I needed. A year can pass like smoke or like stone. Mine did both. There were days I painted from sunrise to dusk, my hands aching, my heart clean. Other days, I could barely stand, the sound of my own breathing. But through it all I created, not for anyone else, Not for legacy or praise. For truth. For survival. The gallery sat on a quiet block in the city's creative quarter, tucked between a candle maker and a used bookstore that always smelled like cinnamon. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The walls were whitewashed and bare when I first visited. Now, they were covered in pieces of me, my solo exhibition, Women Who Vanished. Each canvas told a version of my story, but not just mine. It was every woman I'd ever known who was dimmed down, softened out, tucked behind someone else's ambition. There was silenced, a mouth covered in gold thread, offered, a faceless woman in a wedding dress standing before a closed door. Echo. A girl curled on a dining chair, surrounded by ghostly silhouettes that looked just enough like Margaret to sting. And at the end of the room, the final piece, a tall canvas, bathed in white. At its center, a golden silhouette, mid-stride, stepping out of a stark black frame. The title etched beneath it in simple script, Reclaimed. The night of the opening, I wore a black wrap dress with sleeves that floated when I moved. I kept my hair pinned up, a single gold brushstroke earring dangling like punctuation. The space buzzed with soft conversation, the clink of wine glasses, the murmur of curiosity. Strangers stared at my pain made beautiful, and for the first time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt powerful. Isaac stood near the entrance, sharp in his suit, his veteran's pin catching the light. He didn't say much, but his nod across the room was steady, grounding. After the third speech and sixth compliment about how raw my work felt, he approached. He handed me an envelope. From the legal aid clinic, he said. I blinked. Ruth? He nodded. She filed the paperwork with you last fall. Said to give this to you if it came back with anything. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it behind the gallery's partition wall. Inside, copies of legal documents, a typed summary, and a note scribbled in Ruth's hand. He didn't just lie to you. He lied to the law. The summary detailed a fraud claim. Brian had submitted false documentation years ago when adjusting his father's trust. He'd stated that no dependent or partner existed who could claim beneficiary rights. That was perjury. A felony. The air in my lungs suddenly felt different, not lighter, just realer. This wasn't revenge. It was validation. Proof that I hadn't imagined my erasure. That it had been methodical, and now traceable. The gallery continued to hum behind me. Laughter, soft footsteps, the occasional gasp in front of Offered. I stepped back out and stood beneath Reclaimed. Not everyone would understand the painting. Some would call it symbolic, others too obvious. But I knew what it meant. The woman stepping out of the frame wasn't escaping. She was choosing. Isaac stood beside me now, watching quietly. Are you going to press charges? He asked. I thought about it. About the courtrooms, the headlines, the cold stares from a family that had already ghosted me in flesh and blood. I'm going to tell the truth, I said. What they do with it is up to them. He nodded. That's enough. And it was. Later that night, as the gallery emptied and I turned off the lights, I stood alone in the silence of my own becoming. The echo of my heels faded. The smell of paint still lingered. And on the far wall, the golden silhouette glowed faintly in the moonlight spilling through the glass. I traced the title with my fingers one last time before leaving. Reclaimed. Not taken. Not stolen. Not rescued. Just reclaimed. By me. The estate hadn't changed. Same iron gates, same long gravel drive that cracked under the weight of luxury sedans. Same fountain out front that gurgled as if pretending not to drown. But I had changed. I parked further down the road and walked the last stretch alone. The heels of my black boots crunched with each step, not defiant, just certain. I wore a simple navy blazer over a slate gray blouse. No makeup, no jewelry. Just a manila folder tucked under one arm, and a clear mind for the first time in years. Inside, the house was alive with quiet tension. The annual trust meeting was in full swing, the entire family seated around the massive oak table like royals before a banquet. Brian saw me first. His eyes narrowed, lips parted in disbelief. "Lillian?" he said, rising halfway. "What are you—" "I won't take long," I said. My voice was steady. "Cool. I just came to return something." Margaret let out a sharp breath. "You weren't invited. This is a private legal discussion." And yet, so many lies were made in public, I said, turning to face them. "All. Let's correct the record." Before anyone could interrupt, the door behind me opened, and in walked Isaac. Dressed in full formal uniform, clean lines, medals shining faintly beneath the chandelier, his posture perfect, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't speak. He just stepped beside me and stood still. The silence that followed was thunderous. I pulled a few documents from my folder and began to read. On July 8, 2019, Brian Pendleton filed an amended version of the Pendleton Family Trust. In this filing, he declared that no current or future beneficiaries existed outside of immediate blood relatives or legally married spouses. He submitted this under penalty of perjury. I paused. I was living with Brian at that time. We'd been together nearly a decade. I had left my career, my income, my independence, under the belief that I was part of this family. Brian stepped forward. "Lillian, this isn't—" I held up a hand. "Let me finish." I laid out each sheet on the table, the timeline, the forged statements, the witness affidavits, the note from Ruth that confirmed our filing with the legal aid clinic. "You didn't just forget me," I said, looking directly at Brian. "You erased me, on purpose." Caroline whispered something under her breath. Margaret stiffened. Brian tried to laugh. "You're being dramatic. This is a trust meeting, not a courtroom." "No," I said. "This is exactly what it should be. A room full of people pretending their legacy is built on honor, while they quietly scrub out the women who gave it breath." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You don't belong here." I stepped closer to the table, placed the final envelope down. "No, but justice does." And with that, I turned and walked away. Isaac followed. We didn't speak until we reached the edge of the drive. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "Once. They won't forget this." "I don't need them to remember me," I said. "I just need them to stop lying." He opened the door to his car, then paused. "What now?" I smiled. "My gallery has a wait list. I signed 3 commissions this week. I'm moving into a loft by the river. Big windows, real light. I'm building something." He smiled back. "Good." That night, in my new apartment, I unpacked a wooden shadow box, the same one Ruth had given me months ago, with velvet lining and brass hinges. Inside, I placed 3 things. A dried sprig of lavender, from the soap in Margaret's bathroom, my old gallery key, bent slightly, from years of disuse, and the gold ring I had once worn like a second skin. I closed the box, labeled it on the side in ink. Things I survived. Then I poured a glass of red wine and walked to the window. The city pulsed softly beneath me. Lights like fireflies, the hum of distant music. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I didn't lose a family. I found myself, and that was more than enough.